So I wanted to talk about finishing 3D prints. And what I've got here are 4 of the same prints in different stages of the finishing process. And this one here is the closest I've got to a bare print, right? You can see all of this is untouched in here. And I've done a little filling with some Aves Apoxy sculpt. Mostly just the large gaps that need to be filled. Now, I'll do a little base sanding on this, just sort of rough up the lines, right? Just try to give a little bit of a texture to the whole thing. I'll go over some of this stuff that's easy to reach, and this stuff in here, most of the time I won't bother, but if I need to, I can take a little piece of sandpaper the size of this groove and get in there and sand that a little bit. But for the most part, I'm really not going to worry too much about this stuff. So here's the second step. This is coated with Rustolium Primer filler. And you can see we've already got some of the layer lines covered, right? The ball is starting to smooth out. At this point, I'm still using some rougher sandpaper just to go over things and to try to smooth out those layer lines. Now you're going to do several coats of this, each time letting it dry. And unfortunately, this stuff takes a while to dry, right? You'll get it dry to the touch in about an hour, maybe 2, depending upon how humid it is where you live. So these things take a while to finish. But eventually you start to get to this level. And you can see here that we're already starting to lose some of these layer lines. And basically what I'm doing is I'm just flooding these areas, right? I'm just flooding it with the primer filler and letting it dry and letting that fill up. But you can also see here what happens if you go a little too far. The primer filler will start to crack. And that's not a big deal. All you do is you wait till it dries, and then you go back over it with some lighter coats and you can fill in those cracks. Then you sand a little bit each time, right? Smoothing it out, getting rid of those layer lines each time, and just scrutinize the surface. I mean, really look at where your layer lines are and what has to be filled. And you can slowly take care of it. Now, like I said, to get to this point, right? Now this is pretty much layer line free, right? It's all nice and smooth. I might hit this with a second coat because it looks like it could use it. But you can't see any layer lines. Now this probably took me 4 to 5 days to do. Between each coat, it needs about a day to really dry and harden. Because otherwise, it's dry on the outside, but it's kind of soft and mushy on the inside. So you just gotta let it dry. And that's what you see this system for is here. This is just a piece of painter's tape on the back, and then I hot glued this stick to it. And I have basically a board with holes drilled in it attached to a shelf that I can just sit this in and let it sit there and dry. And if it takes a day, it takes a day. Whatever it takes to dry, you just got to let it go. And then each time you just look over the surface, right? You scrutinize it. And you just slowly, little by little, you uniform it. And you make sure there are no lumps and bumps. No lumps, no bumps, no layer lines. You just take your time and you go over each and every inch. Now, a lot of this stuff like in here, very hard to sand. I'm just going to cover that in primer filler until it becomes smooth. And that's what I did here. And you can see it's all nice and smooth. Even in here, look. Well, easier to see with this one. It gets kind of like a 2-layer effect there. There's sort of like a bump and then a slightly higher bump. You just keep You got to work on your aim with the primer filler. A lot of times I'll do it outside in the sun or on the front porch underneath the light, so I can use the glare on the wet paint to see exactly where I'm spraying, right? You need to get good. You're not just covering it, but where the paint goes, so you can sort of pinpoint areas that need to be filled versus areas that are good. And you just take your time, you scrutinize the finish, you sand and sand and sand, and even if you go back, like there was a couple areas I just noticed that are a little blue here, like here, you can see I'm starting to get back to the plastic. Not a big deal, it doesn't matter. I'll just go back over it again real lightly. And basically you just keep going until it's nice and smooth and clean. And it takes a little practice and a little aim and a lot of patience. And you just go through the layers until you erase them all. And you'll get a nice, uniform, smooth looking paint.